Hello everybody, my name is Daulton Nelson, and today I'd like to talk about a game I just beat. That game being Dragon's Dogma, Dark Arisen for the PC. Dragon's Dogma was developed and published by Capcom, and it is a open-world action RPG. I don't have many viewers when it comes to this channel, so when it comes to game recommendations, I rely on my friends. My friends are very valuable in a myriad of ways, with one of them being that they're all RPG and fantasy fans, which contrasts my own interest in action and absurdist games. So, when my friends strongly recommended that I play Dragon's Dogma, I became very interested in the title. I've come to find out that the game is a cult classic, loved by those who've played it. Some even describe it as the best game you've never played. Furthermore, the game is made by the same team who've made Resident Evil 4, led by director Hideaki Itsuno, who's known for Power Stone, Devil May Cry, and Darkstalkers. So, with all of this in mind, I was fully ready for an interesting experience. But after playing through Dogma, I don't think I like it as much as my friends expected me to. Right away in the game, you're thrown into some pretty captivating set pieces, involving both fighting and being defeated by a dragon. The latter event sees your player character lose their heart to the dragon, leaving this big scar on their chest. This event triggers the story in the game, leading you to become the Arisen, which is an offshoot from your normal Japanese hero story. The game becomes even more entertaining when you go through the character creator. This creator is pretty robust, so you could create a character to your liking. I personally had fun with it and made something a little silly. After the initial events of the game, you leave your hometown to go on your adventures, revealing the open world of Grancis, a fantasy kingdom that you're free to explore. This is where the game starts to falter for me, as you start to catch on to a few things. One is the combat, which is fine at first, but as the game goes on, and it will go on, 38 hours on for me, the combat never really progresses that much. For the combat, you have a light attack button and a heavy attack button, and if you're not an archer, you'll be mashing the two buttons the entire game. If you do have a bow, then you have two more buttons to use, one to hold down to aim, and the other to mash to shoot buttons. I played as an archer, so I can say that even with this added combat option, the combat still doesn't get all that much more interesting. The game does try to freshen things up a bit with skills, which you access through holding another button. Holding such will reveal a menu with 3 more attacks to use at your disposal. Each skill will use stamina when executed, but the trade-off is a more powerful and useful attack. Personally, I like the skills and what they bring to Dogma. They're an especially welcome addition to the monotony of regular combat. Staying on skills, the skills you have at your disposal all has to do with what vocation your character has. These vocations are essentially character classes, and I think you can level them up by going out into the world of Grancis and using your skills to defeat monsters. While you're doing so, you'll also amass discipline points in the background, which you can use at an inn to buy skills and even swap between different vocations. You can even combine vocations as long as you reach the maximum level on one of your vocations, which overall makes for a pretty entertaining class system once I found out about it. Which, notice how I worded that. For as much as I like vocations and skills, a big problem with the game is its lack of communication with the player. A game like Dragon's Dogma is pretty complicated, so you'd think the game would do its best to help players along the way, but instead, a lot of the essential concepts that belong to the game are just kind of swept under the rug. And this doesn't just happen to systems within the game. This can even rear its head in the story, as characters you don't know will just appear, and you'll be expected to care. Speaking of, the story of the game is pretty non-existent. Most plot points the game attempts goes nowhere. At its worst, there will be some big revelations that aren't reacted to, aren't given any motivation or consequence. Like when a cockatoo attacks the main hub of the game, Grand Sorin. You'd think what I just said would be a spoiler, but because the city is fine afterwards and any worry is just swept away with one line by the king's slave driver, this point is irrelevant. It doesn't need to exist. The main story of the game revolves around you and the dragon that stole your heart, which you'd think would be pretty simple to focus on. But the dragon isn't even around for most of the game. I don't even know its name or its motivations. I don't get why I should care when, say, a cult tries to bring him into the world. Other than, of course, that Grancis will be terrorized and destroyed, but even then, Grancis isn't fleshed out enough to deserve player engagement. Grancis itself is a pretty generic fantasy setting, with dull muted colors, uninspired settings, and like 4 places where humans live. The creatures of this realm are pretty predictable: goblins, wolves, harpies, bandits, and orcs. In fact, for the most part, that's all you'll be fighting throughout the game. The game will have its moments with giant creatures, like golems, griffins, and chimeras, but they're always the exception, never the rule. The way Dogma introduces new enemies is pretty dated and laughable. In Dragon Warrior-esque fashion, palette-swapped enemies will be in the tougher sections of the game, with their behaviors not even changed. Instead, Capcom just makes them damage sponges. The only other species worth mentioning are the pawns, which are humans but different. Literally. There are no other discernible differences between the two, other than the pawns' dedication to helping the Arisen. These pawns act as your party members throughout the game, with a permanent main pawn you can customize to have following you around like a Pikachu. Any other pawn must be recruited by finding them out in the wild. These pawns will all have different looks and character builds you can use to build your party. Personally, I don't think the pawn system is that great. The nature of recruiting pawns dehumanizes them, making them disposable in nature. I can't connect to a pawn in the same way I would connect to permanent party members in a normal RPG. The way you're supposed to use pawns is that you swap them out to fit whatever situation is ahead. But, and I know RPG fans are going to hate to hear me say this, I think a system like the one in Final Fantasy XIII does a better job of having party roles swapped to fit gameplay needs. Plus, that game has interesting party members at the least. Another aspect of Grancis I found boring were the items: herbs, ales, tonics, magic jewels. You know, years before Dragon's Dogma released, games like The Secret of Monkey Island and Earthbound purposely subverted fantasy tropes to bring a more interesting twist on the established RPG genre, and in the years since Dogma, games like Lisa and Undertale continue to wow players with new and interesting ideas. Yet the team at Capcom seemed to have been perfectly content with delivering a bland and unimaginative fantasy world that doesn't offer anything new. It's almost to the point where nothing really defines the game, or gives it a hook of which to sell upon. Which is a shame, because I look at the world they built, and I can see a lot of effort was put into the overall design. But this world just needs more. The closest game I can think to compare this to is Fallout New Vegas. There are several aspects that link these two games together, but where the Nevadan wasteland excels over Grancis is that the team behind Vegas could pull from the mythos of Paradise pretty easily and continue to delivering interesting content between uneventful walks. But in Dragon's Dogma, a walk to a new location isn't met with a new story or new looking location. There's nothing there but the next quest you have to check off your list. Speaking of which, I think it's time to get to what I think is the worst aspect of the game: the quests. The quest design in this game is really poor. Most of the quests in the game are either kill X amount of enemy, escort missions, or go to location and kill the thing quests. The worst aspect about that last type of quest is when you have to go all the way to the location, kill the thing in minutes, and then go back to where you got the quest. There is so much walking in this game, it is ridiculous. Dogma does have a fast travel system, but it's limited to having a certain item to do so. Each time you fast travel, you lose the item. And I never found where you can buy these items, so most of the time I just walked to wherever I needed to go. It was a waste of time. I don't see what is so wrong with an unlimited fast travel system. It saves a lot of time and effort. I don't get it. There are some smaller things of note as well, like the poor voice acting, the poor voice modulation, the poor ending, and I mean the real ending, not the one you think is an ending, and the music, which I thought was pretty good. In conclusion, Dragon's Dogma is not for me. It's too slow, too cryptic, and too detached for me to consider it fun, so I'm going to give it a final score of a 3 out of 10. When it comes to friends, they're indispensable, and I'm glad I have the friends that I have. So, to those watching, I would say that Dragon's Dogma is loved by fans of fantasy and RPGs, so definitely shop around for other opinions before totally writing this game off. This might be a game for you, and not for me. That concludes my review of Dragon's Dogma. If you like my review, you can like, comment, or subscribe. I also have social media links down in the description below, as well as a link to my online portfolio, where you can see video game design works that I have done. And with that out of the way, please make sure to have a nice day.